So there was an interesting move made in the NFL yesterday, and it makes you wonder what the hell's going on with one team, and it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Their general manager, Omar Khan, was on the Pat McAfee show starring A.J. Hawk, and he reported that a Mitch Trubisky extension should be done shortly. It'll be a 2-year deal, and this coming on the heels of them announcing that Mason Rudolph would also be back, and Kenny Pickett is still the starter there. But it's interesting that they wanted to make sure that the backups were in place with Kenny Pickett coming back for year 2 of his role as starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it just makes me wonder, is there some concern about Kenny Pickett, considering, and this doesn't get talked about a lot, he also, much like Tua, dealt with multiple concussions last year. Is there some concern by the Pittsburgh Steelers that he will be ready to participate in a full season next year for Pittsburgh?
I was going to ask you guys, did he have 2?
Yeah.
I remember reading about that, and my reaction was what you just said was, why was so much of it made about Tua, but not as much discussed about Kenny Pickett?
Yep.
Do you think it was just more Tua's injury history coming into the league, or was it the matter in which we saw those concussions and we kind of were more led to say, oh, these are – they looked more vicious in nature, or maybe just because of the timing in which they happened?
I think Tua's symptoms looked worse, which is
like
weird.
the immediate of it.
Like his hands.
Like him falling back down. Yeah, his fingers.
Gang signs.
Yeah, like locked up. No, they were not, Berto. They were not gang signs. They were just.
He was throwing up sets. Dang.
My neighborhood, those are gang
They say in
signs.
moments like that, you reform to your greatest form of training.
Jeez.
Damn. But it is interesting because the Kenny Pickett stuff just sort of kind of flew under the radar. Nobody really talked about that. I think one of them he self-reported as well too, and was like, "Yeah, I don't feel all that good." And then they pulled him from the game. But yeah, he suffered as many concussions last year that we know of as Tua did. And yet here the Steelers are making moves. Like I thought that either Mason Rudolph or Mitch Trubisky would be gone this offseason.
Yeah, they're keeping all of them.
Which is kind of weird, no?
I mean, I'm 3 quarterbacks. I guess that's becoming the norm. Is that the norm now? I mean, 3 quarterbacks. You could use to say that's 3. You're 1 heavy. If you keep 3 QBs, but that's what they've done. That's what they've done. Yeah, that's what they've done.
It used to be the norm, and then they changed the 3rd quarterback designation in the 2011 CBA, or 2010, 2011, whichever year you want to throw it on. But they used to make that where you could dress all 3, and the 3rd guy didn't count against it. But as soon as you needed to put him into the game, you would literally take a player who was on the active roster, deactivate him, and then activate your 3rd-string quarterback. And then all that stated was that guy's now active to come into the game, and the starter may no longer come back into the game. That's the player who you would be deactivating in this case due to injury. Well, once they got rid of that rule, teams stopped keeping 3 on their active roster, in part because they kind of thought to themselves, look, if we go through 2 quarterbacks in the span of a week, we got a problem going to a 3rd-string guy anyway. So we'll have an emergency 3rd-string quarterback. We'll get through the game. The likelihood of that happening is so low, it's not worth it for us to keep that veteran guy who's going to make close to probably $1 million a year. We can get $1 million in savings, or let's just say we'll put him on practice squad. Well, he'll get maybe a third of what that veteran would be paid. So that's how they have dealt with it for a period of time. Some organizations are different, but it is interesting that with Pickett being drafted, coming into his 2nd year, you keep Trubisky, you keep Mason Rudolph, who also signed back. A lot of stability in that quarterback room. And I don't know if that's just a lack of confidence they have in Kenny Pickett, or it's maybe more they like the direction of where things were going in the second half of last year, the way he was playing, and they want to keep as much the same as possible.
I mean, the other team this reminds me of is San Fran, because the Niners have 3 quarterbacks. And I think everybody agrees, well, they've got 3 quarterbacks that are there because there's some injury concerns, and they want to make sure they've got somebody that's going to be able to play, and Sam Darnold's there, and we've talked about the discussion between the two, and it feels like the same thing in Pittsburgh, but it's not really being discussed. And if you go back and watch Kenny Pickett last year, he did show signs of improvement late in the season, but I don't know that anybody looks back at last year and says, "Oh, he completely lit the league up."
Nobody ran away with it. Kenny Pickett played well down the stretch, but he didn't run away with, he's the guy. He's the guy, but I think he's the guy because he's their draft pick, and Trubisky didn't play well enough where, Pickett was going to have to wait. And we definitely, have no expectation for Mason Rudolph at this point. I mean, he's had a couple opportunities, and he didn't take them either. So we talked about the whole Zach Wilson thing, and the one thing that resonated when I was listening to Q talk about it is you got to see what you got. You got to get reps to develop. And I think Pittsburgh really wants to see Kenny Pickett be the guy for multiple reasons. It's great for business if Kenny Pickett develops into a franchise guy that can lead them the way they need to be leaded. I mean, it's such a traditional franchise. They have done it so well where they've only had X amount of coaches, X amount of quarterbacks, and that's been their thing. It's a staple of what Pittsburgh represents. So I think there's a lot riding on Kenny Pickett being that guy for the Steelers, but he didn't by any means run away with it like, yep, there's our starter. This is the future. This is what we have to look forward to, even though I think he did give Steelers fans some positive moments to take away before the season was over.
I mean, the numbers aren't great overall. I mean, 7 touchdowns, 9 picks. Like he improved late in the season, but yeah, there's just like you look at it, but it's interesting that it's sort of not really been like, I think more of the conversation has been about Mike Tomlin and still keeping his never had a losing record streak going, and just sort of, little improvements they saw late in the season. But Pittsburgh's in kind of an interesting spot because if you look at that division and you just look at who they're going to be dealing with in that division, I think it's pretty obvious they've got the worst quarterback situation in the AFC North. And how many teams around the NFL who have the worst quarterback situation in the division do you look at and go, oh, yeah, that's a team that I'm not concerned about. That's going to be a team that will be contending next year. Like, feels like there's some bigger issues there than maybe it's kind of been overlooked because of the Lamar Jackson story, Joe Burrow's extension, Deshaun Watson's fetish, and there's the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Geez.
This is true, and there's the Pittsburgh Steelers who are kind of floating there, sitting at the bottom, and I don't know how optimistic Steeler fans are going to be heading into next year.
I've said it before, man. I have nothing against the guy, just haven't really enjoyed watching the film of Matt Canada's offense. I feel like if they move on from Kenny Pickett, Matt Canada somehow then has survived. And I think Pittsburgh stands could probably relate to that. I mean, first off, Kenny was a rookie quarterback, so he's going to go through some growing pains. But it doesn't matter who you talk to. And I'm not the only one who's been critical of it. Ask Ben Roethlisberger. He's openly talked about it as well. And he obviously has more equity built up with the Pittsburgh Steelers fan base. So I'm just saying if the Steelers really want to take a good hard look at why their offense isn't clicking on all cylinders, might want to look at the execution, the scheme and all that, and how all that's being done with the guy calling the plays, because that's been going on for a while now, and I don't really see it getting that much better.